Good afternoon. That's a view from the old world, and I suppose those of you in the new world, it may still be good morning. And I, at the outset, I should introduce myself. I'm Jim Crow. I'm Professor of Classical Archaeology at the University of Edinburgh. Before I go any further, I would request that you make sure that your mics are closed off and muted. This afternoon, it's a great pleasure to introduce my colleague from Edinburgh, Eberhard Sauer, who is Professor of Roman Archaeology and has been in Edinburgh for the past 2 decades, a little longer than me. Before that, he studied at Oxford, completed a DPhil on aspects of a Roman spring and coins in Gaul. He went on to lecture at the University of Leicester, and also while at Oxford, he undertook the excavation, or initiated excavations, I think it was there, at a Roman legionary fortress at Alchester. And that's not entirely unconnected with the subject of what he'll be talking about in a few moments. This is one of the very few presentations as part of this book festival, and I've dipped in and out and I've been enjoying things, which is completely concerned with archaeology and material culture, and particularly field monuments. I think there are 2 things I would like to say, and then I shall hand the floor to Eberhard. First of all, it's the methodologies that were used, and secondly, the context in terms of our understanding of ancient armies. First of all, the methodologies, and I think there's a great deal to be understood here, because Eberhard has the 2 volumes which he'll be talking about. And let's just remember, it's not just 1 volume, it is 2, and I shall now attempt to hold them up before the screen like that. Those of you who remember what a telephone directory was like, that's the sort of scale. Now, the reason they have to be so large, and this is, of course, a credit to Eberhard's energy in bringing all this material together, as that it includes not simply the results of fieldwork and historical context, but also a number of really important specialist studies, which are significant not just for the material cultures which were discovered as part of the fieldwork, but also, secondly, in terms of the chronologies. Because, of course, this is why I think the methodology is very interesting, because Eberhard is talking not about the Roman world, a road which is fairly, some archaeologists would almost say text-heavy. He's talking about the Sasanian world, which is perhaps a little text-light, and much of our text is, after all, written or is observed much, much later. And although they did, in the course of their studies, discover some ostraca, they were very few. So there's a limited amount of the sort of traditional means of chronology which a Roman archaeologist or a classical archaeologist might apply. So there's been lots of other methodologies applied. So that's one aspect, and I don't want to go on for too long because this is for Eberhard really to talk. And the second one is, it's within the context of how we understand ancient armies and the role that archaeology can play. In the Roman world, there is a long tradition of Roman military archaeology, the study of Roman frontiers. And in Britain, for instance, that goes back over 4 centuries. What I think Eberhard and his colleagues, and I'm not going to go, Eberhard will mention his colleagues, I'm sure, Eberhard and his colleagues from Iran and elsewhere have been able to achieve is almost to create an archaeology of the Sasanian military world, a reflection of its scale and its enterprise within a very short period of time. He's been at Edinburgh for 2 decades, and in the course of 2 major projects, one supported by the British Institute of Persian Studies and the ICHHTO, and secondly, a large project with the ICHHTO. As I say, he and his colleagues have been able to essentially create a new archaeology of the Sasanian world, with all the implications that has for our understanding of the power of the Sasanian Empire and what Rome faced in its foes. And now I shall hand over to Eberhard.
Thank you very much to the organizer. Thank you very much, Jim, for the kind introduction. I will attempt to share my screen. Not very good at this. Can you all see this?
Yeah.
Excellent. So thank you very much again, Jim, and I'm particularly glad you also mentioned my colleagues, because it was certainly not a one-man project, but Jebrael, Nokandeh, Hamid, Omrani, Rekavandi, numerous contributors, some of which are mentioned here, have made this possible. Now, our project on the ancient arms race is concerned about the competitive build-up of military capabilities in the major empires of the ancient world, with particular focus on those parts of the ancient world, or that part of the ancient world where we have the largest concentration of large military fortifications anywhere in the late antique world, and that is in northern Iran. Now, you may wonder, and now this is the third book of a sequel. The first one came out in 2013 on our early excavations in Iran. Then we've published the work on our work in Georgia, much more recently, the Caucasus defenses, 2 years ago, now last summer, on our more recent work in Iran. You might wonder, is this more of the same, or what is that is new, and is it of any significance? So I will focus in particular on what new contributions the project has made. And first of all, I just wanted to show you where we are. So you're seeing here, first of all, the Gorgan Wall, which is the longest fort line barrier in the late antique world. It's on the southeast corner of the Caspian Sea, with a dense concentration of fortifications behind. The much shorter Tamisha Wall nearby, and we will also briefly be talking about a large fortification at Khalid Iraj near modern Tehran. Now, first of all, thanks to a drone survey, which David Nashkidashvili and others have carried out, we have a much clearer, it will give you a much clearer visual idea of the sheer magnitude of this construction project. It also revealed some details about the architecture within forts that we had not been aware of before. But more importantly, perhaps, our more recent excavations in the forts have shed much more detailed insights as to the density and duration of occupation. Now, some 20 years ago, people not only didn't really know when the Gorgan Wall was built, but they were also wondering, were these forts actually really occupied, or did people maybe just occupy them in times of crisis? Now, this is now no longer in doubt. Already in the first phase of the project, we established that there are long barracks, but now we found that there are large annexes to the barracks, so effectively doubling the full floor space of people living in the barracks. So roughly half of the interior of forts is occupied just by barracks. So there is a large garrison possibly living there with their families in these forts. There are numerous storage pits, there are storage jars, there are ovens, they belong to several phases. So these forts were occupied intensively for 150 years or even a little longer. We also gained much more insights into the architecture and scale of the monument. Thanks to the initiative of my colleague Jebrael Nokandeh in particular, we excavated this very large bridge, plugging a weak point in the system, one of the river crossings of the Gorgan River. The Gorgan Wall survived here to a height of 7.5 meters, which is the highest that we have found so far, and just shows you the sheer level of investment and efforts the Sasanian army went into to plug a weak point. In terms of the Tamisha Wall, Richard Bates sonar survey established its terminal or probable terminal in the Caspian Sea, so that's about another kilometer of Tamisha Wall, but more importantly, it right leads to the area where the shore would have been the Sasanian era. The sea level of the Caspian Sea was about 3 meters lower than it is today. So not only has our recent project added a few more fortifications that we didn't know before, such as this one here, left upper corner, big fortress discovered by Kristen Hopper and Iranian colleagues. such as Hamid, Omrani, Rekavandi. But more importantly, we have a much better understanding of the relative and absolute chronology. So in the early phase of the project, we didn't really know, are those big fortifications in the hinterland? Are they all contemporary? Are they all later? Are they all earlier than the Gorgan Wall? Now it is very clear that at least some of them are earlier. So the one top right corner is definitely earlier than the Gorgan Wall. And the same may be true for some which are of similar architecture. So they date back probably to the early 4th century. We also seem to have an earlier frontier along the Gorgan River, where we now found various small forts which line the river. So it's an evolution of the system, and one of the largest one of these is a 125-hectare fortress that we'll see in a moment, which may date to the 6th century. Also, the chronology of that is not so firm. But this is not yet the largest monument that we have found, or that we have explored. Jointly explored with Muhammad Reza Nemati and made in Musavinia. We also looked at Kali Raj. That's a 2 square kilometer, or almost 2 square kilometer fortress, walls of 5 to 15 meter side. So here you just see one of the projecting gates of this massive compound. It's 40 times larger than the average Rome legionary fortress. Here you see a legion for purposes of comparison. They think that the holding capacity will have been something in the order for 40, maybe 50,000 men. And there's more and more evidence for large standing armies and massive military investment. You also see some of the better known other Sasanian fortification for comparisons, Kalipolgon, but not so heavily defended, but 125 hectares. Gabri Calais, little under a quarter of the size, but still much bigger than a Rome legionary fortress, some forts in the Gorgan Wall and various fortifications in the hinterland. For purpose of comparison, I also plotted some Roman, late Roman forts and fortresses. In the corner, as you will see, they were smaller, very creative in architecture, but all smaller. That's not a matter of choice, but there are basically no very large late Roman fortresses, except for fortress cities, hilltop fortifications, etc. In terms of fortress cities, there is similar investment. But it's not just about defensive architecture. It's also, as Jim also rightly pointed out, all the major insights offered by the specialist contributors. And I just want to single out here one in particular, which are the ostraka. So for the first time, we actually now also have written documents associated with military site, namely the big one, which we've just seen. So this ostrakon here refers to spares, to spades, to horses. So possibly military supplies, other refer to foodstuffs, which are of course also illuminated by archaeological and archaeobotanical work. So let me conclude our last slide. The Sasanian Empire invested massively in its northern defenses, notably in the area of northern Iran and in the area of the Caucasus, which we've of course also explored as part of our ERC project. Maybe less on its southern defenses, from which the fatal attack later came. We also explored the Fulaj fort with Nasser al-Jari, Seth Braithman, and Derek Kennett. And it's because of its strong northern backbone, I would argue, that the Sasanian Empire was able to successfully engage in wars on more than one frontiers. And we cannot really understand how it was able, even if just only temporarily, to cover much of the Levant if the northern fortification belt had not been so strong. So I think it did make a real difference to the inner prosperity. It helps us to explain why they established such massive cities, such as this 3 square kilometer one of Dasht Calais in the Gorgan Plain, which would not have been possible if there hadn't been this military investment in the north, which proved unconquerable for a very long period of time. Thank you very much.